Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. The Drowning Bird ****. On a windswept beach at the edge of a quiet coastal town, a solitary figure knelt beside the water, his heart aching from the day's events. Miles O'Connor had always been the kind of man who thrived in solitude. His life as a marine biologist studying the ocean's most mysterious creatures was a welcome escape from the pressures of the world. But lately, even the steady rhythm of the tides hadn't been enough to ease his mind. Personal troubles had a way of sinking deep, like an anchor pulling at your chest. As he wandered the shore, the sunset casting long shadows over the sand, something caught his eye, a small form struggling against the waves. At first he thought it was a bird caught in a turbulent patch of water. It was an odd sight for a beach known for its calm, its waters usually gentle, a perfect place for tourists to rest their feet in the shallows. He stepped closer, the squawking of a distressed creature carrying on the wind. With his heart pounding, Miles waded in to the edge of the surf, his boots sinking into the wet sand. The bird was caught in a rip current, helplessly flapping its wings, its body caught in the undertow. Instincts kicked in before thought had a chance to catch up. He moved quickly, grabbing the animal and pulling it free of the water with surprising ease. The bird flailed in his arms, its eyes wild with panic. Its feathers were sleek and iridescent, shimmering like a gemstone under the last rays of the dying sun. With a sharp breath, Miles cradled the creature against his chest, feeling its heartbeat thrumming against his own. He didn't know why, but in that moment he felt a strange connection, a bond with the trembling creature. He had saved many animals during his career, but this felt different. There was a pulse, a warmth, almost like something had shifted in the air around them. The bird's wings stopped struggling and its body relaxed, but its gaze never left his. Miles carefully brought the creature to a secluded part of the beach, settling it on a flat rock. As he knelt beside it, he reached out, careful not to spook it. His fingers brushed along its delicate feathers, a strange sensation tingling on his skin. There was something otherworldly about it, but he pushed the thought aside. "You're going to be okay," he murmured to it, his voice soft, yet filled with an unexpected sense of responsibility. The bird's chest rose and fell with each breath. Its feathers shimmered again, almost as if responding to his touch. But then a shift occurred. The creature began to glow faintly, its form blurring in the fading light of the day. Miles recoiled instinctively, blinking rapidly as the shape before him began to change, morphing in ways he couldn't comprehend. The bird's body elongated, its feathers shifting and melting away to reveal smooth, glistening skin. The creature grew taller, more human in form. But it wasn't fully human. No, this was something else entirely. It was a being of incredible beauty, with eyes that seemed to hold the depth of the ocean itself, vast, endless, and impossibly ancient. Her hair, dark as midnight, cascaded around her shoulders like a waterfall of ink, glimmering with an iridescence that mirrored the stars themselves. Her naked body shimmered with the same otherworldly glow as her transformation, but there was no discomfort in Miles' gaze. The connection he had felt moments ago grew stronger, as if their souls were drawn to one another like magnets, an unspoken understanding passing between them. She raised a delicate hand, reaching for him. "You saved me," she said, her voice melodic, lilting in a way that reminded him of the waves lapping gently at the shore. But the language she spoke, it wasn't any he recognized. It was foreign, ancient, and yet Miles understood. The sound of her voice, the way her words curled in the air, made something stir deep within him. He could feel her power, raw and undeniable, but there was also something fragile beneath it. Something that spoke of vulnerability, of an unspoken need. Miles' mind raced. He tried to comprehend what he was seeing, but the logical part of him faltered, overwhelmed by what was unfolding before him. His heart thundered in his chest, a primal response to the unearthly presence before him. Miles stammered, trying to make sense of it all. What are you?" The woman, this being, smiled, a smile that seemed to carry the weight of centuries in its curve. "I am not from here," she said, her words more distinct now, as though the strange language had twisted into something he could understand. Miles opened his mouth to speak again, but his voice caught in his throat. The weight of what he was witnessing crashed down on him. This wasn't just some lost creature from the sea. No, this was something far beyond human understanding, a being that had crossed the stars, defying the limits of what he had thought possible. Her eyes met his, and in that moment, Miles knew there was something about their bond that ran deeper than chance. The feeling was mutual, like an invisible thread linking their fates together. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rich with gratitude and something else, something he couldn't quite place. Her warmth seemed to seep into him, and a deep sense of peace settled in his chest, as if he had just come home after a long journey. But Miles didn't have time to contemplate what was happening. The moment they shared was interrupted by a distant sound, a rumble, faint but undeniable. The woman's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing as she turned her gaze toward the horizon. Something or someone was coming. Before he could react, she stood, her figure tall and commanding. "You must leave," she said, her voice no longer a soft melody, but one laced with authority. "They will come for me." Miles didn't fully understand, but he couldn't ignore the urgency in her tone. He looked out at the gathering darkness beyond the waves, his pulse quickening. "The bond begins ****. The woman stood tall and resolute, her dark eyes scanning the horizon with an intensity that made Miles' chest tighten. The air seemed to hum with energy, charged with an unseen force. He wanted to ask her who they were, what was happening, but the words caught in his throat. The connection between them, that inexplicable pull, made everything feel weighty, like the answers were just out of reach, yet something deep inside told him that he was meant to be a part of this, whatever it was. "You need to go," she repeated, her voice now edged with a quiet urgency. Her gaze flickered back to him, her eyes softening for a fleeting moment. "Trust me, this place is no longer safe." Miles couldn't move, couldn't tear his eyes away from her. She was radiant, but there was an underlying sorrow in her expression, a flicker of something that made her appear so fragile. His instincts, the ones that had guided him through countless life-or-death situations with marine animals, screamed at him to protect her, to help her somehow. "You can't stay here," she continued, her voice almost pleading. "They will come for me, and if they find you here—" Her words hung in the air like a warning he didn't fully comprehend. But there was something undeniable about the bond they had formed in such a short time. A connection that went beyond understanding, beyond language even. Miles felt it in his bones. "I can't just leave you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. You're not human." She glanced at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she stepped closer, her bare feet brushing the sand as though it were nothing, as though she were at home here on this earthly shore. "I am not," she said softly, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "But I am more than you could imagine. And if you stay, you will be dragged into a war you cannot win." Miles couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her. He had never been a man to shy away from danger, especially when it came to something that stirred him so deeply. He took a step forward, determined to know more. "I can't just leave you," he repeated. "I don't even know your name." The woman regarded him with a curious gaze, as if pondering whether or not to trust him with the truth. She exhaled slowly, and for the first time, a sense of vulnerability flickered across her face. "My name is Lyra," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I come from a far-off star system, from a world that no longer exists." She broke off abruptly, her eyes flicking toward the water, narrowing with suspicion. Miles followed her gaze, his pulse quickening. The ocean, calm just moments ago, now seemed to churn unnaturally, waves rising higher, crashing with an intensity that hadn't been there before. "They're coming," Lyra murmured, her body tensing as if preparing for battle. Without thinking, Miles grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "What do you mean they're coming? Who are they?" She didn't answer immediately, her gaze still fixed on the darkening water. The air grew thick, heavy with the tension of an impending storm. Miles could feel the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Something was wrong, something beyond the ordinary. The water began to glow faintly, an eerie, unnatural light radiating from the depths. Then, from the shadows beneath the waves, shapes began to emerge. Figures cloaked in dark, iridescent armor that shimmered like oil in the moonlight. They were humanoid but distorted, their features almost insect-like, with sharp, angular faces and glowing eyes. Miles' heart pounded in his chest as they began to ascend from the water, their bodies moving in unison with a disturbing precision. Lyra stepped back, her expression hardening. "I told you," she said, her voice now tinged with regret. "They found me." "Who are they?" Miles asked, his voice a breathless whisper. He felt a strange mix of fear and awe, unable to tear his eyes away from the approaching figures. "They are the Kthar," she said, her words laced with contempt. "My enemies. The ones who destroyed my world and now seek to enslave others. They want me because I am different." "Different how?" Miles asked, though he was afraid to know the answer. He could feel his pulse quicken, his senses alert to the danger that was closing in on them. Lyra looked at him, her eyes softening for just a moment. "Because I carry the power of my people, a power they cannot control. I am one of the last of my kind, and they will stop at nothing to capture me. The Cthar moved swiftly now, their dark figures gliding across the sand like predators closing in on their prey. Their leader, a towering figure with glowing red eyes, stepped forward, his voice cutting through the night air. Lyra, he hissed, his voice a rasping growl. You cannot escape. You are ours. Miles stepped in front of Lyra instinctively, the need to protect her rising within him, though he knew he was outmatched, outclassed. These beings weren't human, they were something far beyond his understanding. Stay back. Miles shouted, though the words felt empty against the overwhelming presence of the Cthar. He had no weapons, no defenses, nothing to protect them from what was coming. Lyra's hand brushed his shoulder gently, her touch surprisingly soothing despite the chaos around them. You don't understand, Miles, she said softly. They cannot harm you. Not as long as I am here. The leader of the Cthar sneered, stepping closer. You misunderstand, human, he said. She cannot protect you. You are nothing to us. Enough, Lyra said, her voice rising with a quiet but undeniable authority. The power within her flared suddenly, and Miles felt the ground beneath their feet tremble. The ocean behind them surged violently, waves rising as if responding to her call. The Cthar leader faltered, his expression shifting from contempt to surprise. You have not fully awakened, Lyra. But you will not stop us. We will take you and your power will be ours. A strange, deep sensation filled Miles' chest, a sensation he couldn't explain but that he felt in his very bones. Lyra's power, he could feel it now, thrumming with energy like a force of nature itself. And in that moment he understood, he was tied to this being in a way that went beyond mere fate. Whatever bond they shared, whatever had drawn him to her on this remote beach, was real, and it was unbreakable. You can't take her, Miles said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. I won't let you. Lyra's eyes flicked to him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and sadness. Miles, she whispered. You don't have to fight for me. This is my battle. The awakening ***. The tension between Lyra and the Cthar hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Miles' heart raced in his chest, his breath coming in shallow gasps. His mind was torn. Part of him wanted to run, to flee from the dangers that were closing in around them, but a deeper part of him, a part he couldn't explain, told him to stay. To protect her. The Cthar leader, his glowing red eyes fixed on Lyra, sneered as he advanced. The other Cthar behind him were positioned like a silent, lethal phalanx, their bodies crackling with a dark energy that made Miles' skin prickle with fear. He could feel their malevolence like a palpable weight pressing down on him. Lyra, standing beside him, radiated an aura of power that seemed to grow stronger by the second. The force of her presence was almost overwhelming, and Miles found himself inexplicably drawn to her, as though every atom in his body was aligned with hers. You will not escape us this time, the Cthar leader hissed, his voice a rasping growl that sent shivers down Miles' spine. Your power belongs to us, Lyra. You cannot hide from us forever. Lyra's expression hardened, but there was something more in her eyes now, an understanding that had not been there before. Her hand, still lightly resting on Miles' shoulder, tightened for a brief moment, and he felt a sudden surge of warmth flood through him. It was as if her energy was being shared with him, bonding them even more deeply than before. He couldn't explain it, but he felt it down to his core. This was not just about survival anymore. This was something much larger, something that would change everything. You will never control me, Lyra said, her voice steady, yet laced with an unmistakable authority. The ground beneath their feet trembled again, and Miles felt a strange hum in the air as Lyra's energy began to ripple outward, a glowing force emanating from her. The Cthar leader's expression faltered for a moment, uncertainty flashing in his red eyes. You cannot defeat us, Lyra. You are one against many. You underestimate me, Lyra replied, her voice calm but powerful. With a flick of her wrist, the air seemed to crackle, and the ocean around them roiled violently. The once calm beach had turned into a battleground. Waves lashed against the shore as if obeying her command, and the sand beneath their feet began to glow faintly with an otherworldly light. Miles watched, wide-eyed, as Lyra's power grew. The ground around them seemed to shift, and the Cthar leader, despite his earlier confidence, took a step back. Lyra had barely moved, yet the force of her presence seemed to hold them at bay. There was something primal, ancient in her, a power that belonged to a race long forgotten, a power that had only just begun to awaken. For a brief moment, Miles felt the presence of something vast, something beyond comprehension, flooding the air. He didn't understand what was happening, but it was clear. Lyra wasn't just any being from another world, she was something extraordinary, something far more powerful than anyone on Earth could ever imagine. I don't want to fight you, Lyra said, her voice gentle but firm. But if I must, I will. The Cthar leader's sneer deepened, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. You are not yet fully awakened, Lyra. Your power is incomplete. And you are nothing without your people. Lyra's gaze softened for a moment, and Miles could see the grief in her eyes. My people are gone, she said quietly. But their legacy remains within me. I will not let their sacrifice be in vain. With a fluid motion, Lyra raised her hand, and the energy around her flared. The Cthar leader lunged forward, but before he could reach them, a massive wave of water shot up from the ocean, crashing into him and his followers with the force of 100 tidal waves. The impact sent the Cthar scattering, some of them thrown backward, others swallowed by the surging water. Miles staggered, instinctively grabbing onto Lyra to steady himself. He felt the strength in her, the power that emanated from her like a living, breathing force. The glow around her intensified, and the energy in the air became almost unbearable. She was holding back something monumental, something that, if unleashed, could obliterate everything in its path. Go, Lyra said urgently, turning her eyes to him. Run. Get to safety. Miles opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak, another blast of energy erupted from Lyra's outstretched hand, sending a wave of force that knocked the remaining Cthar off their feet. Their leader, now standing at the edge of the beach, growled in frustration, but his hesitation was clear. The power Lyra wielded was formidable, and though he was still dangerous, the Cthar leader seemed to understand that he was no match for her in this moment. Do not think this is over, the Cthar leader spat, his voice thick with hatred. We will return. You cannot hide forever. With a final, seething glance, the Cthar retreated, disappearing into the ocean as the waves calmed once more. The beach fell silent, save for the crashing of the remaining waves. Lyra, panting slightly from the exertion, dropped to her knees in the sand, her energy still crackling in the air around her. Miles hesitated for a moment, then rushed to her side. Are you all right? He asked, his voice thick with concern as he helped her to her feet. She nodded, but there was a weariness in her eyes. I am fine. But I can only hold them off for so long. They will return. And next time they won't hesitate. Miles swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had seen the power she possessed, and he knew it wasn't something to be taken lightly. She was a force of nature, capable of turning the tide of a battle with a single thought. But the Cthar were relentless, and as much as Lyra wanted to protect him, he knew that they were in this together now. Whatever danger lay ahead, he couldn't just run from it. You don't have to face this alone, he said softly, meeting her gaze. We'll figure this out together. Lyra's eyes softened, and for the first time since their meeting, she allowed herself to show a flicker of something that resembled hope. You don't understand, she said, her voice quiet. I have never known someone like you before. Your courage, your willingness to stand by me, it's unlike anything I've ever encountered. Miles took a step closer, feeling the bond between them growing stronger. I don't know what's happening, but I'm not going anywhere. I'll fight with you. Whatever it takes. For a moment they stood there, the crashing waves their only sound, the two of them united against an enemy they couldn't yet fully understand. The hidden truth ***. The night had settled over the beach like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The wind had died down, and the stars above twinkled quietly, distant witnesses to the chaos that had unfolded on the shore. Miles could still feel the hum of energy in the air, the lingering traces of Lyra's power, now fading but not entirely gone. He looked at her, standing in the moonlight, her silhouette framed by the waves. The soft glow around her had diminished, but her presence still radiated strength, something otherworldly. Her gaze was distant, her thoughts clearly elsewhere, but there was something about her, a quiet sadness that made Miles' chest tighten. Lyra, he began, taking a step toward her, his voice low and cautious. What's going on? I need to understand. I know you're not from Earth, but it's bigger than that, isn't it? Why are they after you? And what do you mean you can't hide forever? She turned to face him, her eyes unreadable for a moment, then softening as she met his gaze. Her lips parted as though she were about to speak, but she hesitated. For the first time, Miles saw the weight of the burden she carried, deep, ancient, and painful. I never wanted this life, Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't choose it, but it's the reality I've had to live with. And it's why I can't stay here for long. Miles' mind raced. He couldn't imagine what it must be like for her. From the moment he had pulled her from the ocean, everything had changed. The world he knew, safe, predictable, was unraveling at an alarming rate. The stakes were higher than he could have ever anticipated. "What are you talking about?" he asked, stepping closer to her. "Why can't you stay here? Why are they after you? I don't understand. All you've done is save me, protect me. You've never hurt anyone." Her gaze softened even further, but there was a hint of something darker, something painful. She took a deep breath, her eyes searching the horizon as if she could see beyond the waves, to some other place, some other time. "I'm not just an ordinary alien, Miles," she said, her voice now steady. "I carry the legacy of a civilization that is long gone. I am one of the last of my people, the Ureshi. Our home world was destroyed, annihilated by the Kthar." "The Kthar?" Miles murmured, the name bitter on his tongue. "But why you? Why do they want you so badly?" Lyra closed her eyes for a brief moment, and Miles could see the pain in her expression. "My people were the keepers of a power, an ancient force that was once used to protect our world. It is called the Saravox. It is a power capable of altering reality itself, creating, destroying, bending time and space." Miles froze, unable to comprehend the full weight of what she was saying. Altering reality? That kind of power seemed more like something out of a science fiction novel than real life. Yet, looking at Lyra, he knew she wasn't lying. The sheer energy she had displayed earlier was unlike anything he had ever seen. He had felt it, tasted it, as if it were alive and thrumming in the air around them. "But why you?" he asked again, his voice shaky. "Why are you the one carrying this power?" Lyra's eyes hardened. "Because my parents, my family, were entrusted with its preservation. When the Kthar attacked, they didn't just destroy our cities and our homes. They wiped out everyone who knew how to wield the Saravox. My family was one of the last lines of defense. And when they died, the power was passed to me." Miles felt the weight of her words sink deep into his chest. This wasn't just about her survival, it was about something much larger, something that could affect the fate of entire worlds. "They killed your family," Miles said, his voice low. "And now they want to use you to control this power?" Lyra nodded, her eyes distant, her face set with determination. "Yes. The Kthar were never content with just destroying our civilization. They want the Saravox for themselves. They believe that with it they can conquer other worlds, enslave entire populations and reshape the universe in their image." A cold chill ran through Miles at the thought of such power in the wrong hands. He knew how dangerous a weapon like that could be. And the Kthar were ruthless. They had already destroyed her world. If they succeeded in capturing her again, there would be no stopping them. "Then we can't let them get to you," Miles said, his voice firm, a sense of resolve hardening within him. "We have to stop them." Lyra looked at him, a mixture of surprise and gratitude in her eyes. "I didn't expect you to understand, let alone stand beside me. But..." She paused, looking away as if unsure of what she was about to say. "But..." Miles prompted, sensing a shift in her tone. "But I'm not sure I can control it," she said, almost to herself, her voice trembling for the first time. "The Saravox is too powerful. And it's inside me now, eating away at me, trying to force its way to the surface. I'm afraid of what will happen if I can't control it." Miles stepped forward, reaching out to her. "You're not alone in this, Lyra. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. You don't have to fight this alone. We can stop them." Her eyes flickered to him, searching, as if seeing him for the first time in a new light. For a brief moment, she seemed to consider something, and then, to his surprise, she reached out and placed a hand on his chest, just over his heart. "You don't know what you're offering, Miles," she said quietly. "This power, it's not something that can be contained easily. I've spent my whole life running from it, trying to suppress it. But every time I use it, it leaves a mark on me. I don't know how much longer I can hold it in. And if it breaks free?" Her words trailed off, and for the first time, Miles saw the fear in her eyes. The fear of what she could become, of what she could lose, not just in her own life but in his as well. "I don't care what it takes," Miles said firmly, his hand now over hers, feeling the warmth of her touch. "I'm with you. We'll find a way. You don't have to fight this alone, Lyra. We'll face this together. No matter what." She looked at him for a long moment as if weighing his words. Then slowly she nodded. A faint but genuine smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't think anyone could understand." "I understand more than you think," Miles replied softly, his voice steady despite the storm of uncertainty brewing within him. "And I'm not going anywhere. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." For the first time, Lyra's expression softened fully, and the weight of the world seemed to lift, even if just a little. There was still a long way to go, still so much they didn't know. But one thing was certain. This bond between them, whatever it was, had only just begun. The path forward ***. The night passed in uneasy silence, the remnants of their struggle against the Cthar still hanging in the air like a thick fog. Miles could hear the soft rustling of the waves, the occasional call of a distant bird, but his mind was elsewhere, spinning with the weight of everything Lyra had revealed. Saravox. Cthar. A power that could reshape the universe itself. It was almost too much to process, and yet, deep down, Miles felt something stir inside him. A sense of purpose. He wasn't sure how he'd gotten here, how he'd gone from a simple man on a quiet beach to a partner in a galactic struggle, but there was no turning back now. Lyra had moved to a small rocky outcrop, where she sat with her legs crossed and her eyes closed. He could see the faint shimmer of her energy still clinging to her, almost like an aura of light that was dimming but never completely fading. She was meditating, or at least trying to center herself. Miles approached slowly, not wanting to disturb her but needing to be close. Lyra, he called gently, standing a few feet away. She opened her eyes and met his gaze, the soft light in her eyes fading slightly, as if she had momentarily been lost in some faraway thought. I know you have questions, she said quietly, her voice tinged with a deep sadness. And I'm not sure how much more I can explain. The truth is, there is so much you don't understand yet. I know, Miles replied, stepping forward. But I'm not asking you to explain it all at once. I'm just here. I want to help. Her gaze softened, but the shadow of doubt still lingered in her eyes. I don't know if you can. The Cthar won't stop hunting me, Miles. And even if we manage to fight them off, the power inside me, the Saravox, it's growing. I can feel it pulling at me, trying to break free. I don't care what it takes, Miles said firmly, his voice unwavering. We'll find a way to stop it before it takes control of you. Lyra looked at him for a long moment, her eyes studying his face as though trying to read something deeper. Finally she nodded. I hope you're right, she whispered. But we need a plan. And right now I don't have one. That hit Miles harder than he expected. The thought that Lyra, who had been so powerful in their fight against the Cthar, was uncertain about the future was sobering. She wasn't just a mysterious alien with unfathomable strength. She was someone just like him, fighting to survive in a world that had turned upside down. You don't have to have it all figured out, Miles said, sitting beside her. None of us do. But we'll figure it out. Together. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood up, brushing the sand from her clothes. I need to go somewhere, she said, her voice distant. To get answers. To figure out how to control the Saravox. You won't be able to protect me from the Cthar forever. I have to stop running from my past. Miles didn't hesitate. Where do we go? I'll go with you. Lyra turned toward him, her expression unreadable. You can't come with me. It's too dangerous. The Cthar are not the only ones who want the Saravox. There are others, beings who have been searching for it for millennia. If they find out where I'm going, they'll stop at nothing to get their hands on me. You think I'm just going to sit back and let you go alone? Miles asked, his voice rising. I'm in this now, Lyra. I've seen what you're up against, and I'm not leaving your side. For a moment, she simply stared at him, her eyes searching his face for something he couldn't quite understand. Then slowly she nodded. Fine, she said, her voice quiet but resolute. But you have to promise me something. Anything, Miles said without hesitation. You have to trust me, she said, her gaze intense. Whatever happens, promise me that you won't run. That you'll stay with me no matter what you find out. Miles swallowed hard. He hadn't thought about the danger, not really. But the truth was, he wasn't afraid of it, not as long as he was with her. He didn't know exactly what he was getting into, but he knew one thing. Lyra had become more than just a stranger on the beach. She had become his responsibility. His partner. I promise, he said, his voice steady. I won't leave you. She met his eyes, searching him for any sign of doubt. When she found none, she gave a small, approving nod. We leave at first light, she said, turning to walk toward the tree line. We need to get to a place called the Riven Peaks. It's a secluded location far from here. It's the only place where I might be able to find what I need. The next morning, the sun rose lazily over the horizon, casting a soft, golden light across the landscape. The air was cool, and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore was soothing, almost peaceful. But Miles knew better. Peace was a fleeting thing. It never lasted long. He packed what little they had, just some basic supplies, and followed Lyra as she led the way toward the distant hills. The Riven Peaks were a 3-day journey, and they would have to move quickly if they wanted to avoid the Kthar and any other enemies that might be lurking in the shadows. For the first part of their journey, everything was quiet. The forest surrounding them was dense, the trees tall and thick, casting shadows that made the world feel darker than it was. Lyra moved with a practiced grace, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, alert for any signs of danger. Miles stayed close, his instincts telling him that something was coming. He didn't know what, but he felt the weight of the silence as though the world itself was holding its breath. They traveled for hours, the sun slowly climbing higher, when Lyra stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. Her eyes narrowed and she scanned the trees ahead, her body tense. "Miles," she said softly. "We're not alone." Before Miles could respond, a sharp, eerie screech echoed through the trees. The sound was like nothing he had ever heard, a piercing, unnatural shriek that sent a chill down his spine. The pursuit ***. The moment Lyra shouted, Miles didn't hesitate. His heart raced as the sound of that chilling screech echoed through the trees. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of an impending threat, and every instinct he had screamed at him to run. They didn't need to speak, the urgency in Lyra's voice told him everything he needed to know. The Kthar were closing in and there was no time to waste. They ran, feet pounding the earth in perfect synchrony, pushing through the underbrush and weaving between trees. Lyra led the way, her pace swift and sure, while Miles kept up, forcing himself to stay focused despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. His mind was racing. What was chasing them? And how did they know where they were? The screech came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of something large crashing through the foliage. Miles glanced over his shoulder and saw a dark shape moving rapidly toward them. Too fast, too precise. Whatever it wasn't human. "Go?" Lyra urged, her voice sharp as she glanced back at him. Her energy was palpable, crackling in the air like static, but she wasn't using it to its full potential. That was smart. She needed to conserve her strength for whatever came next. The ground beneath them began to slope downward as they approached a ravine, a deep, jagged crevice cutting through the landscape. Lyra reached it first, her hands grabbing hold of a rope bridge that stretched across the gap. Miles followed, his heart in his throat as he tried not to look down at the dizzying drop below. "Go faster!" Lyra yelled, urgency bleeding into her tone. The screech came again, now much louder. Miles could see the dark shape coming closer, slithering between the trees. A shadow, unnatural, swift, and lethal. He could feel it closing in on them. Lyra reached the other side of the ravine first, her feet landing solidly on the other side. She glanced back and for a split second their eyes met. Her expression was tense, determined, but also afraid. It wasn't the fear of someone who had given up, though. It was the fear of someone who knew the stakes, who knew the cost. Miles sprinted forward, just as a dark figure leaped out from the trees. He didn't need to look back to know that the Kthar had found them. The creature was upon him in an instant, its body twisting and shifting, almost like smoke, its claws slashing through the air. Miles barely managed to duck, feeling the rush of air as it passed inches from his face. His heart slammed against his ribs. The Kthar were relentless. He stumbled forward, hands outstretched to grab the rope, but the bridge swayed dangerously as the creature's long, shadowy form reached for him. "Lyra," he yelled, desperation in his voice. Her face twisted with fury, and before he could blink, the air around them shimmered, a pulse of energy that pushed the creature back. For a moment, the Kthar's figure faltered, just enough for Miles to grab hold of the rope and swing himself across the chasm. He landed heavily on the other side, his legs nearly giving way under the impact, but he fought through it, staying on his feet. "Go?" Lyra shouted again, urgency lacing every syllable. She was already ahead of him, moving quickly now, her energy flaring around her like a protective shield. The Kthar creature wasn't far behind. Miles could hear its claws scraping against the bridge, the sound of it moving quickly, relentlessly. But Lyra wasn't slowing down. She had already begun to call upon her power, the air around her crackling and sparking, but this time she wasn't just defending. She was preparing for something bigger. They didn't stop to look behind them as they ran, but Miles knew the creature wasn't the only one following them. The forest felt alive with something darker, an energy, a presence, something ancient. It was the Kthar's doing, no doubt. Their influence was stretching out, spreading like a sickness across the land. They reached the edge of the forest by the time the sun began to dip below the horizon. The sky was a mixture of purple and orange, the last vestiges of daylight fading into night. Lyra's pace didn't falter, and Miles stayed close, barely keeping up as they continued toward their destination. The Riven Peaks were still hours away, but Lyra had a sense of where they needed to go. Miles could tell by the way her gaze darted back and forth, scanning the shadows with unnatural precision. "Lyra, what's going on?" Miles gasped, struggling to catch his breath. His legs were burning from the exertion, but he wasn't about to stop. "We're close," she said, her voice low but steady. "But the Cthar know where we're going. They'll be waiting for us. We have to keep moving." Miles frowned. "Isn't there a way to throw them off? Something we can do to hide or confuse them?" Lyra shook her head, her eyes fixed on the darkening horizon. "They're too powerful. They've already found us once. We can't outrun them forever." A chill ran down his spine at the finality in her words. He knew she was right, but he refused to accept it. They had to find a way to stop them. They couldn't just keep running forever. Ahead, the trees began to thin out and the landscape shifted. The ground sloped upward, rising toward the jagged peaks of the Riven Mountains. The wind picked up, carrying with it the sharp scent of the cold air, but there was something else. Something unnatural, like the scent of ozone before a storm. "Lyra," Miles called, his voice tight. "Are we sure this is the right way? How do you know this place will help you control the power inside you?" "I don't," she admitted quietly, glancing over her shoulder, her eyes dark with uncertainty. "But I have to try. The Saravox, it's the only way to stop the Cthar. If I don't gain control of it, they'll kill me and take it for themselves." "You're not alone in this," Miles reminded her, his hand instinctively reaching out to touch her arm. "We'll figure it out. Together." She looked at him then, her expression softening just for a moment. But then the sound of a distant screech cut through the air, closer now. The Cthar were not far behind, and they were closing in faster than ever. Lyra's expression hardened, and she turned to face the peak ahead of them. "We don't have much time. Whatever happens next, you have to trust me. Trust that this is the only way." Miles nodded, the weight of the moment settling heavily on his shoulders. The truth of the stakes was clearer now than it had ever been. They were running out of time. The final stand ***. The Riven Peaks loomed before them, sharp, jagged, and seemingly insurmountable. The wind howled through the high cliffs, carrying with it the scent of impending danger. The once serene landscape was now a battlefield, the air thick with tension as Lyra and Miles moved toward their destination. Ahead of them, the path twisted through dense foliage and rocky terrain. The mountain's base was just within reach, but the sound of the Cthara's screeches echoed louder with each passing moment. They were close. Too close. Lyra's expression was set, her eyes narrowed in determination. Her breath was steady, but Miles could sense the strain in her movements. The energy she had been controlling, the power of the Saravox, was taking its toll. He could see the way her body trembled, the faint glow of her aura flickering like a dying light. "Miles," she said, her voice low but filled with urgency. "We're almost there. But the Cthar will not stop. This is where I make my stand. I need you to trust me." He looked at her, a pang of worry twisting in his chest. The idea of letting her face this alone, especially with the Cthar closing in, was almost too much to bear. But Lyra had insisted on this path. She had made it clear that the Saravox was the key to everything, the only way to stop the Cthar and anyone else who might come after her. "I trust you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He stepped closer to her, his hand brushing against hers. "Just don't do this alone." For a brief moment, her eyes softened. "You're not alone in this. You never were." Then, without another word, Lyra pushed forward, her pace quickening as they reached the base of the peak. Miles followed closely, his mind still racing with everything they had learned. Everything they had fought for. He had seen her powers in action, had watched her harness the energy of the Saravox with terrifying beauty. But even now, as the Cthar closed in, Miles wasn't sure if it would be enough. The jagged rocks ahead of them formed a narrow pass, barely wide enough for both of them to squeeze through. The air was thick with anticipation, a sense of foreboding that seemed to seep from the very ground beneath them. Lyra was already moving up the pass, her body agile as she navigated the treacherous terrain. Miles, though not as fast as she, kept pace, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of the Cthar. They reached the summit just as the first of the Cthar appeared. The creature was tall and skeletal, its form shifting and warping like a living shadow. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, and its claws stretched out toward them with unnatural speed. The Cthar screeched, the sound sending a shiver down Miles' spine. Lyra stopped abruptly, her body tense, her energy flaring around her like a force field. "Stay back, Miles," she warned, her voice carrying a deep resonance that made the air vibrate. "This is the final test. I need to draw them in." Miles hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest, but he knew she was right. This was her fight. He just had to make sure she didn't face it alone. The Cathar advanced, the air around them crackling with the force of their malevolent energy. Lyra lifted her hands and in an instant the world seemed to shift. The ground beneath them cracked open, and energy surged from the peaks, a blinding light that burst from her core, filling the space around them. The Cathar hesitated, their forms flickering as they recoiled from the intensity of her power. Lyra's voice rang out, steady and commanding. "You will not take me. I will not be your weapon." The energy around her swelled, an explosion of light and power that reverberated through the mountainside. The Cathar were thrown back, their bodies contorting as if the very force of her power was tearing at their existence. Miles stood frozen, his eyes wide as he watched Lyra harness the Saravox like never before. But it wasn't over. The Cathar were relentless. More of them appeared, their numbers increasing by the second. Their bodies morphed and shifted, their forms growing larger and more monstrous with every moment. "Lyra!" Miles shouted, panic rising in his chest. He knew she couldn't hold them off forever. The energy was draining her, the toll of using the Saravox growing with each passing second. "I'm not finished," Lyra said, her voice strained but filled with fire. "This power is mine, and I will use it to protect everything I love." She stepped forward, her hands raised, and the world around them seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The Cathar screeched again, but this time, their cries were filled with pain, the power of the Saravox overwhelming them. One by one they disintegrated into dust, their forms vanishing in the face of Lyra's will. But then a new figure appeared. This one was different. Taller. Darker. A figure of pure shadow, its eyes glowing with malevolent intensity. It stood apart from the others, exuding a sense of ancient power that made the very air feel heavy. This was the leader. The one who controlled them all. The Cathar leader stretched its claws, and the ground beneath Lyra's feet trembled. "You think you can control the Saravox?" it hissed, its voice a slithering whisper that seemed to echo in Miles' skull. "You are nothing. You are a mere child playing with fire." Lyra's energy flared brighter, but the leader's presence was suffocating. Miles could see the strain on her face, the toll it was taking on her. She was fighting with everything she had, but the leader was stronger. It was as if the very fabric of the universe bent under its command. "We don't have to do this," Lyra said, her voice calm, though the tension in her body told a different story. "I'm not your enemy. But if you want to take the Saravox from me, you'll have to kill me." The Cathar leader let out a low laugh, the sound like grinding metal. "It is already too late for you. The Saravox belongs to us and you will fall before it." Miles stepped forward, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife he had kept at his side. He didn't have the power Lyra did, but he wasn't about to let her face this alone. She had fought for him. He would fight for her. "Not today," Miles said, his voice low but determined. He threw the knife forward with all his strength, the blade gleaming in the fading light. The Cathar leader turned, its eyes narrowing, and the blade collided with its chest. But the leader's form rippled, and the knife passed straight through it, as if it were nothing more than a shadow. Lyra's eyes widened, the last of her energy pouring into a final, desperate surge. The Saravox within her flared one last time, and in an explosion of light and raw power, the Cathar leader was consumed. It screeched, but the sound was drowned out by the thunderous crack of the mountain itself. For a moment, everything was still. The world held its breath. Then Lyra collapsed to her knees, her aura flickering one last time before fading away completely. Miles rushed to her side, his heart in his throat. "Lyra." He gently cradled her in his arms, her body trembling from the exertion. Her eyes fluttered open, weak but alive. "We did it," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. And for the first time, Miles allowed himself to hope. The Cathar were gone. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.